You guys see me? Hear me? Hi, it's been a long time since we had a volunteer meeting lecture. Last time you were here, it was Bobby Feldman and me, and we miss Bobby. He is working for the state of Florida. But we've been very blessed because we have another manager in the department, and that's Ryan. And he's really we're very thankful for him. We have a lot of staff members here. We have our Vice President, Mike Costin, our Executive Assistant and Program Development Director, Manager, Nancy. Megan does exhibits. Matt does everything, registrar, and he knows every piece of history you'll ever want to know. Chet is a curatorial assistant. Sherry is HR and an assistant as well. And did I miss? And Patty is our store manager. Larry does zip code reports, so we know where people are from. Did I miss anybody else? Oh, there she is. Bree is in marketing. She's a marketing assistant. And I'm Holly. I'm the other manager in this department, and I'm also very short. So we thank you for coming here. Patty has books for sale, and our author has graciously agreed to sign some books after the meeting. I already have mine up there. Two things are happening. We're going to have author Alexandra Reimer to speak in just a couple of minutes. But right now, I'm very thankful and to present this Jan MaGirl. Jan and her husband Jamie for many years played Thomas and Mina Edison. We lost Jamie about 5 years ago, and he was wonderful. He was Mr. Edison. But to get you started and warmed up, Jan's going to be Mina Edison and tell you a little bit about her, and we're so thankful she agreed to do this.
Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I have been invited many times to speak about my famous husband, but not very often to speak about myself. And I gotta say, I'm not in the habit of talking about myself, so excuse my nervousness and my needing to look at my notes on occasion. I was born after the Civil War on July 6, 1865. Today is my birthday. If I was alive today, I'd be 158 years old. I was the middle born of 11 children to Louis and Mary Lucinda Miller. My parents, Louis and Mary Lucinda, were very devout Methodists and very believers of strong, sound education. My home in Akron was focus of many of the society pages, along with the Firestones and the Studebakers. My father was an inventor. He invented the Buckeye mower and reaper, and Miller Manufacturing manufactured numerous farm implements in that. He had 92 patents to his name, and that's 1,001 less than my husband had, but who's counting? He was probably the one person that was most supportive of my whirlwind marriage to Thomas Edison. My father was a self-made man. He was an inventor. And I think he identified with Thomas Edison in those respects. There were other ways where he had nothing in common with Thomas Edison. I say whirlwind because I met Thomas in January of 1885. We became engaged that summer, and then we were married in February of 1886. Thomas had recently turned 39, and I was only 20. Other than my father, my rest of my family was less than enthused about the marriage. You see, I had been promised to George Vincent. Now, George Vincent was the son of the Reverend John Vincent, who was the bishop of the Methodist Church. As I said, we were very devout Methodists. It was Reverend Vincent and my father who started the Chautauqua Camp in southwest New York State. The Chautauqua Camp was to be a place for Sunday school teachers to go to learn how to teach the Bible stories to children. The late 1870s was the start of the Sunday school movement, where children did not have to sit through a long sermon they could barely understand. They were able to go with the teachers, who were most often women, and less than educated women many times in the church. So the idea of Chautauqua was to educate the Sunday school teachers to teach the children the Bible stories in Sunday school. So anyway, Reverend Vincent's son George and I had everyone thought we were promised to each other. And I gotta say, I did nothing to dissuade them of that. We did spend holidays from school together and summers at Chautauqua. So the summer that I was engaged to Thomas, I have to say, I didn't go to Chautauqua. Let me explain how this whirlwind marriage all came to be. I graduated from high school in Akron, Ohio. I did the grand tour of Europe, and then when I returned, I went to Miss Johnson's finishing school in Boston. My parents wanted me to associate and mingle with the upper crust, wanted me to learn the ways of the ladies on Beacon Hill. I've got to say, I can't say as I felt like I fit into that group. I felt like the girls were always maybe looking down at me. I was Midwest, I was devout Methodist, so I never felt at home in that circle. But I did have one very good friend. My friend Louise Igo from Indianapolis was living in Boston at the time. And she was at that time being courted by my brother Robert. So she and I became very good friends, and she introduced me to her friend, Lillian Gilliland. Lillian Gilliland was married to Ezra Gilliland, who was best friends with Thomas Edison. As they were younger and traveling the telegraph circuit, they would live together on occasion and travel from telegraph office to telegraph office. Thomas Edison was visiting in Boston, and so Mrs. Gilliland decided to have a soiree and invite all of the eligible young ladies who might be a good wife and mother for the newly widowed Thomas Edison. So this is the Wizard of Menlo Park is going to be in Boston. And if you can imagine all of the young ladies falling all over themselves, trying to endear themselves to him. I didn't do that. I had been raised by parents who had me in those situations among famous people and inventors quite often. Actually, Thomas in later years told me he was most impressed by how I could have such composure and stature while playing the piano so mediocre. He was a recent widow, and so he had 3 children. So it was a ready-made family that I was going into. What was I getting myself into? I was from a big family, and I thought all families would be like mine. The oldest was Marion, and she was 13 years old. She promptly informed me I was too young to be her mother and too old to be her chum. Her brothers, William and Thomas Jr., Thomas Jr. was 10 and then William was 8. I didn't meet them until after the marriage because they were basically living with their maternal grandparents. But Marion stayed pretty close to her father, and she became quite adept at manipulating him. I was the first of the Miller girls to be married, and I was married at my parents' home in Akron on February 26, 1886. Thomas had bought this property here in Fort Myers the year before, so the plan was for us to have our honeymoon in Fort Myers. Soon after our nuptials were over, we were on the train and on our way to Fort Myers. On the way here, we learned that the houses that were to have been built were not completed yet. Also, my stepdaughter, Marion, was going to be here to greet us with the Gillilands and with Lillian's sister, and my parents soon followed. So, we get to Fort Myers, we get to the dock at the Edison property, and they put me into a donkey cart and carried me downtown to the finest hotel in Fort Myers, the Keystone Hotel, which was like a bunkhouse. We stayed there for 3 nights before we camped for 2 months in the houses that were not quite finished. No running water, no plumbing. Of course, the generator had not been hooked up, so no electricity. And you had to go out over the river to go to the bathrooms. I did not like Fort Myers. We didn't come back very much for the next 15 years. First of all, Thomas and Ezra Gilliland got into this big fight. And Thomas proceeded to fence off between the 2 houses so that Ezra and Lillian couldn't even get to the dock if they wanted to. He cut off their water. He cut off their power. So the Gillilands got the hint and sold the property. And we eventually were able to buy it then. At that point then, I was able to make a main house for the family and a guest house for all of the visitors who came for the season. They didn't come for a week or 2, they came for a month or 2 for the whole season. So, as I am having more control over the home, and Fort Myers had the railroad, plumbing, electricity, all of the conveniences. The Fords became our neighbors. I came to love Fort Myers, honestly did. I entertained. I started garden clubs. I started the Periwinkle Garden Club, which is still going today. And I started the Safety Hill Garden Club for the Negro ladies of the area. I taught Sunday school to the men of the Methodist Church, a woman teaching the men. That was very impressive. And I started a round table, which dealt with civic issues of the day. So I actually came to call myself a home executive. And the Women's Business Club asked me to join them. So I stayed very involved in civic and environmental causes in the area. Now our main home was in Llewellyn Park in Orange, New Jersey. Thomas purchased that when we were married, and I wanted to be as close to his work as I could. I knew if we moved into New York City, I would never see him. Little did I know, living a mile away, I would not see him either. He would spend night and day at the laboratories. We had 3 children and started our family soon after marriage. Our firstborn was Madeline, followed by Charles, and then several years later we had Theodore. 3 children, girl, boy, boy, same sequence and separations as Thomas's first family, girl, boy, boy. So 6 children to Thomas Edison. Marion, who was the oldest of the first family, did the grand tour with 2 of my sisters. She learned that the name Edison could open a lot of doors in Europe, and she used it successfully. She actually ended up marrying then a German soldier. Now, this was the early teens of the 1900s, when talk of war and Germany was everywhere, the Great War. Her father was not very pleased with this decision, and so very disappointed. The two boys then, Thomas Jr., of course, had Thomas's name, so he would get involved in every scheme and every deal that thought he could find. Thomas and I spent many hours and much money bailing him out of whatever things he got into, and just to save the Edison name. The final straw came when the last time Thomas bailed him out, it was with the agreement he would change his name. So Thomas Jr. Edison became Burl Willard. But that did stop the Edison name from being so abused. William was the youngest, and he was only 7 when his mother died. And so I feel so bad for him because he had such a lazy nature, and he wanted to please his father so badly, but he just didn't know how to do it, and it was in such an awkward way. And neither of the boys grew up to have children. They did marry, and they never did really become successful. Miriam did eventually divorce the German soldier and came back to the States. And I have to say, in later years, we did have a good friendship. I was determined that our children were going to do better. Madeline went to Bryn Mawr, and she didn't disappoint until she married a Catholic. She married John Sloan and had 4 children, 4 boys, all with the middle name of Edison and the last name of Sloan. Charles attended MIT, and he didn't graduate because his father, in his senior year, wanted him to come work with him in the Edison companies. He said he could do much better working with him than he could finishing that last year of school. Charles was a rather average student, so probably that was the best for his future. Charles did become Secretary of the Navy for a while, as well as Governor of New Jersey, and then continued his life as the president of Edison Companies. Theodore was our youngest, and probably the most like his father. He did go to MIT, and he did graduate. He had several patents to his name, but his interests were more in the environmental area, and he actually was quite active in saving the Corkscrew Swamp right here in southwest Florida. So that was a success for him. Thomas was 19 years older than me, and he died in 1931. I lived for 17 years more. I fell in love. I had a friend from Chautauqua, a childhood friend, whose wife had died about the same time as Thomas. He started writing to me. He sent me love letters. I had not been courted like this, and I felt like a schoolgirl. We eventually married, and we traveled extensively for 5 years before he became ill and passed away. With his passing, I changed my name back to Mina Edison. I had been Mina Edison Hughes at that time. And the year before I passed, I donated this property to the city of Fort Myers. I had hoped to see it be used for education or possibly a library. I think today this property as a historic site has met all of my expectations. I want to thank you for inviting me to talk today. Thank you.